And we are live. My name is Abe Mashni. I'm here at the Baldani Law Group studio here in Lexington, Kentucky. And we're joined by somebody that I'm really excited to have on, somebody that's truly a leader in her field. Her name is Lynn Harris. She's a lawyer and the executive director of the Justice Action Network. Holly, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be home, albeit under these very odd and sometimes tragic circumstances.
Absolutely. So can you just tell our viewers just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm a mom, so this is what happens during COVID. This happens to me in live shots a lot. It's really nice, especially when it's on national television. I'm the executive director of the Justice Action Network, which is actually the largest bipartisan organization working to reform our criminal justice system. We work at both the federal level and in about a dozen states across the country, including Kentucky. And what's unique about our organization is we truly are bipartisan. So all of the bills that we support have bipartisan sponsorship. We work with groups from the far left to the far right because we really believe that's the best way to build a sustainable movement. So, we were really involved in the passage of the First Step Act at the federal level, which was the groundbreaking sentencing and prison reform bill that President Trump signed into law in 2018. And now, obviously, because of the onset of the COVID pandemic, we're deeply immersed, in trying to move some emergency criminal justice reform legislation in the relief package that's currently being negotiated between the White House and the House and Senate.
All right. And you are a UK law grad?
I am, yes. I hope that doesn't embarrass them. I practiced law for several years and then got into, was in government for quite a while, then got into more traditional politics. And I can tell you I'm really glad to no longer be working in traditional partisan politics. I mean, obviously, we still engage with lawmakers on the right and on the left, but this movement is really more about unifying people rather than dividing them, which I think is sort of a rare thing these days.
Criminal justice reform, though, can be a dividing topic. It shouldn't be. I don't think it should. But what?
Well, if you're Tom Cotton, sure. But I think that the opponents of reform are now few and far between. And, we've really built a lot of bridges with law enforcement. I'm really grateful for a lot of those partnerships. In fact, we're working really hard to secure, more relief funds for state and local justice systems that are really struggling right now because of COVID. Kentucky's done an incredible job, actually, has been a national leader in safely reducing county level incarceration. I mean, I think back in May, it was down about 30%. And according to the Chief Justice Minton, the recidivism rate has been extremely low. So, but the problem is that, so many of the folks that are on sort of the front lines of our justice systems rely on, taxpayer dollars, occupational taxes. And of course, these, the revenue has COVID has blown a hole in revenue because of the stay-at-home orders. And without, getting into, whether we should or should not have done that, it is what it is. And so, in order to continue to adequately balance public health and public safety, we think those state and local relief funds are really critical.
So how long have you been at the Justice Action Network?
I cannot believe it's 5 years, and it'll be 6 next year, which I think is the longest relationship I've ever had, personal or professional, if you don't count the kid. Sure. It's really been an amazing experience. When we started this journey, there were a lot more opponents of reform, and I think it's because we were talking past each other and not to each other. And I think the criminal justice reform movement did a disservice to the movement initially, when I think we didn't do a lot of outreach to victims' rights organizations, and we didn't do a lot of outreach to law enforcement groups, because I think there was this presumption that those organizations would just be opposed. And in fact, when we really sat down and started having, really sincere conversations, we had a lot in common. And so we've been able to build bridges and, pull a lot of law enforcement support. And actually, KSAP, the Sexual Assault Prevention Group in Kentucky, and the Domestic Violence Coalition in Kentucky were actually among the first victims' rights organizations to support criminal justice reform, and even wrote an op-ed in support of the federal legislation, back in 2018. So we've really been just so grateful for all the support here in Kentucky, particularly among groups, that were the first really to be supportive of criminal justice reform.
Sure. So you talked a little bit about the First Step Act, and that was a game changer in the federal law system, and it's something that we cite a lot, and that it kind of changed the game for a lot of inmates that had been doing a lot of time, that they could get released. And there's one really important aspect of the First Step Act, and that is compassionate release. And we are currently representing multiple people that are going through that process. But can you explain to the viewers about how the First Step Act changed compassionate release, and what it may have, and why it's important now with especially with COVID?
Yeah, I mean, basically it expanded it, and now there's, compassionate release, especially because of the first COVID package. The first relief package actually allowed, at the federal level, the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Prisons, they had very, very wide discretion on any incarcerated person who was low-level, nonviolent, that those individuals could be transferred to home confinement. And so, we work with Families Against Mandatory Minimums. Kevin Ring over there does an amazing job. You're probably a member of KACDL. We work with NACDL at the national level, really fabulous people. And, they're doing just incredible work, pro bono, to help a lot of folks who are incarcerated, file their petitions. My hope is that a lot of the obstruction that we've seen from the DOJ is going to diminish some, because I think now people really understand how jails and prisons have become, the country's #1 hotspots. Look, when you've stacked people on top of each other like sardines in jails and prisons for years, when a virus enters that facility, it's going to spread like fire through a dry barn. And that's going to impact, everyone who goes in and out of that facility, including, defense lawyers like yourself, and correctional officers and law enforcement. And then those individuals take the virus back to their families and their communities. And then all of a sudden, you've got a really serious problem on your hands. So we actually just put a poll in the field last week. We partnered with Cut 50 to do a poll to gauge, American voters' support for, moving the most susceptible behind bars. So your elderly inmates, those who are sick, certainly pregnant women. I mean, don't even get me started on, the tragedy of keeping pregnant women behind bars during a global pandemic. We had overwhelming bipartisan support for transferring those individuals to home confinement. Because look, I think a lot of people now understand that, especially at the federal level, some of these sentences are just absolutely outrageous. I mean, you take Alice Marie Johnson, my very dear friend who was granted clemency by President Trump. She was actually the subject of his Super Bowl ad, for your football fans out there. She was offered by the prosecutor, 6 years. And because she chose to go to trial, here's a woman, who had been through a terrible tragedy in her life, a divorce. She had 6 children. She was struggling to feed them. She made a terrible decision. I mean, initially she tried gambling, that didn't work out. So, she made the terrible decision to become involved in a drug conspiracy, and she admits that that was a terrible decision. She was the phone person. She only ever really was involved over the phone. She ended up with a life sentence. I mean, this is a delightful grandmother. And so I think people really understand now the egregious injustices that can happen because of our, totally ridiculous sentencing laws. And that's what we're, looking to reform at the Justice Action Network.
Well, at the federal level, so a lot of people don't know that prosecutors get to pick and choose the cases that they take. And so, whereas in a state case, if somebody commits a crime, that a law officer is going to charge them, arrest them, and the state prosecutor is going to have to prosecute them because it's going to be put on their desk, and that is now a case because they've been arrested. However, in the federal system, the AUSA or the United States Attorney, they get to pick and choose, and they say, that case right over there, I want to prosecute that. And so their success levels are way high. I think it's a 97% conviction rate, and then maybe there's like a 3% of cases actually go to trial, and then from that point it's a much, they usually win at trial. But whenever the rules are set up, they're set up in a way to induce people to plead guilty, because you get
1,000%. Look at poor Alice. She ended up serving 21 years of a life sentence. Okay, when if she had just pled out, to the charges that the prosecutor had put before, that she had been charged with. She would have been home in probably much less than 6 years. So you're exactly right. I think it's outrageous. And I'll tell you what's really sad is that prior to, this administration, there had been guidance given to federal prosecutors, not to charge at the highest levels in every case, to really use your discretion. And then, of course, Jeff Sessions came in as Attorney General, no longer there, thank God, and also lost his Senate race. So that tells you how popular his tough on crime policies were, even in Alabama. And he came in and totally, did a 180 on that, and actually issued written guidance to his prosecutors to charge at the highest levels, pile on, to try to force and really coerce, their defendants into pleading out. And that's really one of, the really serious problems with our justice system. And so, thank God, for defense attorneys like yourself, who are willing to go in and help some of these folks that who are really scared. And some of them have made mistakes. And in fact, some of them have made terrible mistakes. But the way that so many people are tossed behind bars for decades, don't even get me started on, the drug laws and the terrible disparities, between getting convicted for, crack offenses and getting convicted for cocaine offenses. Of course, black defendants, were far more likely to be convicted of crack offenses. White folks, were more likely to be convicted of the cocaine offenses, and yet the crack stuff, was, exponentially, was punished far harsher than the cocaine offenses were. And so we've been able to address that. And in fact, we've addressed it retroactively now, which is why a lot of folks are now coming home. But, look, we eviscerated an entire generation of Black men. And, I think we've got a long way to go before we can really reach true racial and gender justice in our justice system. Women are, no one ever talks about this, but women are actually the fastest growing segment of the incarcerated population, and more than 80% of them are mothers.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is?
Well, it starts with drugs, but there's a statistic that is really, that's heartbreaking. 1 in 4 women entering our justice system right now is either pregnant or a mother to a child under the age of 1. And as a single mom, that breaks my heart, thinking about these moms going to prison. There was a case very recently at the federal level that was just unjustifiable. A woman by the name of Andrea Circle-Bear, who of course was poor and on an Indian reservation. She was charged with a really obscure crime, like maintaining a drug-involved premises or something like that. A federal judge chose to send this 8 months pregnant woman to prison during a global pandemic. Of course, she contracted COVID and she died. And, I think about, she went into labor and she delivered her baby. She was never able to meet or hold her baby. She died in the hospital. And, her mother, I've had the great privilege of listening to her mother speak and talk about the last time she spoke to Andrea. And it's really sad. And, I think, as a Christian, I feel like we've got to be doing more to help, the most disadvantaged folks in our society and really be a voice for those who are voiceless. Had Andrea Circle-Bear, had really zealous representation, I don't know, what would have happened to her. But the tough thing, I think, for so many public defenders is they're overwhelmed. I hear it, prosecutors are overwhelmed, but public defenders are overwhelmed too. We've just got to do more, I think, to ensure that particularly for folks who are sick with addiction issues or mental health issues, that we're diverting those folks to treatment. They're going to see better outcomes that way anyway. If we just toss them behind bars, they're simply going to become better criminals. And then they're going to return to society, return to bad habits. They'll likely enter our justice system again. Taxpayers are throwing good money after bad, and that's the cycle of failure that we seek to break with reform.
It seems to me it starts and ends with drug use. And why, and I don't understand the logic between somebody with a drug offense that obviously has an addiction, that is making poor choices based on that addiction. And at this point, it's not necessarily a choice because it's a disease that they have, and they are not they're making those poor decisions. And then the solution is not to just put them in jail, where they sit around and talk to the other inmates and then get no rehabilitation, get out, and what do they want to do? They want to do more drugs. And so it seems that the smart solution would be to fix the addiction issue, and it's and you're not going to do that.
We've got to invest more money in treatment and
Absolutely.
Rehabilitation. There are a lot of prosecutors, I think, who would divert a lot of these cases if there were beds to divert them to.
Right.
And that's where we've got to put a tremendous amount of money up front. You're going to save all the money on the back end.
Right.
When folks are able to become rehabilitated, to find a good job, secure adequate housing, improve their education. You tag somebody with a felony, you know this, you tag them with a felony, that's it. It's almost impossible really to find decent employment to support yourself and your family. So what are you going to do? You're going to return to crime, return to prison, and again, we're back to the cycle of failure.
Has there been any, I know here in Kentucky, we've done a really great job, probably in the last 5 years. It seems like there's a new expungement bill that's occurred every other year, but that's not available in the federal system. And so is there anything other than a pardon or a clemency as far as with the President Trump? And so is there any appetite that you've seen or
Yes.
heard? Okay.
Yeah, in fact, there's bipartisan appetite for all of our friends who are watching, who also watch Fox News, which I assume is like 99.999% of folks in Kentucky, including all of my family members. Representative Guy Reschenthaler from Pennsylvania has sponsored a clean slate bill with a Democrat, he's a Republican, with a Democrat, Lisa Blunt Rochester, that would actually allow for automatic record sealing, which is something we've worked very closely with law enforcement on. And under automatic record sealing, you don't even have to go through the process of filing the paperwork and the whole petition process. It's
Right.
just, if you remain crime free after a period of time, then your record is automatically sealed. What that means is the general public can't see it, but law enforcement can maintain those records for investigative purposes. So law enforcement actually really appreciates, that, and has been very supportive of Clean Slate. It's really only passed in one Commonwealth, and that's Pennsylvania. We were a part of that, another big sort of bipartisan win that got a lot of national attention. But having that Clean Slate bill filed at the federal level, is really great. And then, Congressman Jeffries, who was one of the bill sponsors of the First Step Act, has expungement legislation. I mean, it really is insane. I think really the only expungement mechanism at the federal level is a really insignificant expungement capability for juveniles, I guess.
Okay.
But outside of that, no. Once you're tagged for life, and unless you're a well-connected or wealthy individual, who can somehow get the attention, of politicians, of a governor certainly at the state level, and the president at the federal level, and can be granted a pardon. Look, you're stuck. And again, how are you going to work? What employer is gonna hire you? And so. We got a lot of work to do at the federal level. You're right. Kentucky's done a great job. I wish Kentucky's expungement law would be even more. We do have a felony expungement here. Right. It's limited, but thanks to Senator Jimmy Higdon and Senator Gerald Neal, another bipartisan duo, we were able to further expand our expungement capability in the Commonwealth. I think that was last year. Or the year before last.
I'll add one more exception. So you need to know a governor or a president, be very wealthy, or know Kim Kardashian, right?
Yeah, and and God bless her. We work, with those folks, and it's wonderful to see celebrity engagement. But it's very sad because a lot of folks who are incarcerated, they think if I could just get Kim's attention, if I could just get Kim Kardashian's attention, and there's so many worthy individuals, who don't have a celebrity connection, and they're not getting tweeted about, right. By a really famous rapper. And so, their stories just go untold. And that's why I'm really grateful for folks, again, like yourself, like NACDL, and, the good people at Families Against Mandatory Minimums, who take on, a lot of these cases and really try to ensure that we right a lot of the really egregious injustices that have taken place, especially at the federal level.
I don't know if you see this, but on our comment section, Aaron Anderkin said that he knows both of us and that he told me to listen closely and you're going to teach me something. And she absolutely is. So thank you, Aaron.
That's really sweet. That's really sweet. Look, I'm not going to teach a practitioner anything. If anything, I feel like we've done we've been inadequate in our advocacy. Look, the overwhelming support that we have from the American people, from the far left to the far right, especially in a place like Kentucky, there's really no state, Commonwealth has been more impacted by the drug scourge than we have, and people get it. They don't want to throw the towel in on their friends and family members. And I just think we got to double down and do a lot more. The one thing about COVID, there's really no silver lining about COVID, I don't guess. But if there's one thing that has been positive, it's people understand that, mass incarceration, over incarceration, whatever you want to call it, was really stupid. It was just stupid. Because it was a matter of time before something like this would happen. And when you stack people on top of each other, certainly at the federal level, 4 to a cell, hundreds to a unit, what do you think is going to happen? Right. And if you think you can lock a virus in a prison or a jail cell, I assure you that's not the case. That the virus is going to spread. It is going to spread to the surrounding community. And then, like I said, you're going to see hospitals and healthcare workers who are incredibly overwhelmed, and it's just not smart. It's not smart.
Well, I don't want to keep you too much, but I do want to talk a little bit about.
You'll see my kid at some point.
Sure. So pretrial release, so bond issues. And so here in Kentucky, it's kind of a mini experiment due to COVID. And the Supreme Court Chief Justice Minton, he really recommended for all judges to kind of, unless under really strict situations, to let people out while they're pre-charged and while they're waiting trial. And that led to decreases in our jail populations across the board. And you mentioned the study. He did say, out of the same period of time in 2019 versus 2020, it's the same rate of recidivism. And so it was like, and it was an extremely low percentage. It was 4% that reoffended while they were out awaiting trial for their charges. And so, and I've also heard a statistic, I think it was also from Justice Minton, about how if you are incarcerated for 3 days, it only takes 3 days that you're going to lose that job. And so, especially if you're an hourly worker, they're just not going to keep that job because they need you to be working. And if you're incarcerated, awaiting charges or awaiting a trial while you're presumed innocent, I might add, that's something that is really a focus and something that I care a lot about, because it's just not fair for somebody to have a lot of money, be able to post an extreme amount of money, get out of jail on very serious charges. And then what I see in court all the time is when the prosecutor will say, okay, I'll give you credit for time served. They haven't looked at the evidence. No attorney has looked at anything about the case yet, but they're pleading guilty because they just want to get out of jail, and they don't have the money to post bond. And so just before we break and before we leave, do you have any thoughts about pretrial release and anything that can be done on that regard?
I do, and I would direct everybody to one of my good friends, Josh Crawford at the Pegasus Institute, which is a think tank, a conservative, right-leaning think tank. He did a paper not too long ago that really highlighted a lot of the cases that you're talking about, where you hear all the time the anecdotes about folks who get out on bail reform and they recommit crime. What you don't hear about is cases you just talked about like the wealthier individuals who were charged with more serious crimes, who are wealthy, so they can, post bail, and so they get out and do something terrible. And, Josh Crawford and the good folks at Pegasus Institute were able to really, draw some attention to those cases. So we can go anecdote for anecdote, and I can assure you that, at the end of the day, you're going to see the need for reform. And God bless Chief Justice Minton and all the judges and public defenders and prosecutors. And again, folks like yourself who've worked so hard during COVID to reduce, the jail population in Kentucky. I am convinced that lives have been saved because of it. I know now the disease is starting to enter some of the jail facilities and folks are really scared. That's why we've got to get some relief during this negotiation right now on the Hill. We have got to get some relief from Congress for state and local governments, who can, ensure folks are showing up for their hearings. It's hard, and you know how it is. I mean, it's hard to ensure that, especially folks with addiction issues, if you can't get them into a treatment program, and a lot of those treatment programs right now because of COVID are either severely limited or shuttered. And so if you can't get them into a treatment program, very often they'll return to using, and then they're not going to show up for their hearing, and then bench warrants are issued and folks come right back to, we've got to just work really hard. Mitch McConnell, if you're hearing me, I know you've kind of backed away from the table a little bit, but we really need support for, our justice system, first responders, especially here in Kentucky, that have done tremendous work to balance public health and public safety and save lives. We got to get them some assistance to ensure that we can continue to keep folks safe and not allow our populations to tick back up again, because that's going to have a really adverse impact on our entire community.
Well, Holly, thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. I know how busy you are, and we're just a little boutique law firm in Lexington, Kentucky. And I know I see on CNN, Fox, and all the news national places, and so you're somebody that I really look up to. And thank you so much for joining us.
Well, listen, it's just nice to talk to somebody that, speaks with my same accent, and I don't need a translator, to talk to my friends back home. So I'm grateful to Kentucky for all the wonderful work that y'all have done in the reform space. I mean, I've been able to take that narrative, to the federal level, and really use Kentucky in many ways, as a model for what we're trying to do nationally in states across the country. So thank you for this opportunity. And hi, everybody. It's great to be home.
See ya. Thank you.